In the elite world of warriors, some stories are told and retold until they become legends. This is one of those tales. It's about heroes, not just in their prime, but long after the battles are over. What happens to a legend when the world stops watching? This is the story of a man who answered that question by disappearing. He swapped classified missions for a bucket and a mop, becoming a ghost in the very place that forges the next generation of heroes. He was an invisible man, until a commander with an eye for detail saw past the graying hair and tired posture and noticed a small, faded mark that told a story of impossible courage. In a place full of warriors in the making, he was an invisible man, the quiet janitor who cleaned up after the elite. For the SEAL trainees, he was just part of the building, a silent fixture as unremarkable as the weight racks or the climbing ropes. But to Commander Thorne, a man who'd seen 3 decades of war, he was a puzzle. It started with a flicker of movement, the way the janitor shifted his weight, a subtle awareness that just didn't belong to a man who simply pushed a broom. Then, one morning, under the harsh locker room lights, Thorne saw it. A faded trident tattoo on the janitor's neck, partially hidden by his collar. A symbol that spoke of a hidden past, of secret missions and a world of silent heroes. And in that moment, the commander knew the most dangerous man in the gym wasn't a trainee. He was the one holding the dustpan. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado smells of salt, sweat, and antiseptic. The air buzzes with energy. The thud of weights, the slap of boots on pavement, and the shouts of instructors pushing recruits past their limits. This was a kingdom of the strong, the forge for America's most elite fighting force. And in the middle of it all was Silas Vance. Silas was in his late 50s, with a quiet that seemed to soak up the noise around him. His hair was more salt than pepper, his back slightly stooped, and his hands were always busy with the humble tools of his trade. His routine was as predictable as the tides. He was there before sunrise, mopping floors and wiping down equipment as the first trainees began their grueling workouts. He cleaned the mud-caked floors of the kill house and emptied trash cans filled with discarded protein bar wrappers and medical tape. To the young men on the base, Silas was less a person and more a function. They were lions in waiting, and he was just the man who cleaned the den. They'd walk past him without a glance, their conversations about dive qualifications flowing around him as if he were a rock in a stream. Sometimes, a careless trainee would bump into him, sending dirty water sloshing from his bucket. A mumbled, "Watch it," was the closest thing to an apology he ever got. He never reacted. His invisibility was his uniform. This was a stark contrast to the gym's reigning authority, Commander Thorne. Thorne was a man carved from the same granite as the institution he led. He missed nothing. He could spot a trainee favoring a bad knee from 100 yards away, or tell if a man was about to quit just by the tension in his jaw. For weeks, Thorne's analytical gaze had been snagged by the janitor. It wasn't one specific thing, but a collection of small details. It was the way Silas never kept his back to a doorway for more than a few seconds. It was how his eyes would track reflections in the windows he was cleaning. He moved with a quiet economy of motion that spoke less of a janitor and more of a predator conserving energy. Thorne had seen that kind of deliberate movement before, in men who had made survival an art form. It was a disconnect, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Thorne filed these observations away, a growing file in his mind labeled the janitor. The mystery was intriguing, but it was just a background curiosity, until the morning he saw the tattoo. It happened in the humid, chlorine-scented air of the dive training locker room. A group of boisterous trainees were celebrating, paying no mind to the old man quietly mopping the puddles they left behind. Silas bent down to wring out his mop, and the collar of his gray work shirt shifted. For a split second, Thorne saw it clearly. It was a small tattoo. The ink faded to a blurry, blue-black symbol, but the shape was unmistakable. The special warfare insignia. The SEAL trident. To an outsider, it was just an emblem. But to Commander Thorne, it was a testament. It represented the successful completion of the most brutal military training in the world, BUDS. It was a badge of honor earned with blood, sweat, and an unbreakable will. not something you get at a boardwalk tattoo parlor. Thorn froze. His mind raced, trying to connect the quiet, stooped janitor with the meaning of that tattoo. Men who earned that trident became leaders, high-level consultants, or revered instructors. They didn't just fade away and start cleaning toilets. It made no sense. Questions flooded the commander's mind. Who was this man? What team was he on? And most importantly, why was he here, living a life of total anonymity, surrounded by the legacy he had seemingly abandoned? From that day on, Thorn's observation of Silas intensified. He was no longer a curiosity. He was an obsession. And the more Thorn watched, the more he saw. He saw Silas secure a trash bag not with a simple knot, but with a swift series of loops that Thorn recognized as a Prusik knot, used in climbing and rescue. He noticed during a fire drill that while everyone else shuffled out, Silas moved to a position where he could observe all exits simultaneously, his body relaxed, but his head on a subtle swivel. One afternoon, a group of trainees was struggling with a navigation exercise, arguing over a map. Silas was sweeping the corridor nearby. As he passed, his eyes glanced at their map. He then stopped by a window, seemingly to wipe a smudge, and adjusted the blinds slightly. It was a tiny, almost meaningless action. But Thorn, watching from his office, saw what it was. The new angle of the blinds pointed directly towards a distant water tower. Silas had given them the answer, a silent, expert correction, without saying a word. The quiet man with the mop was a ghost instructor, moving unseen through the halls, and Commander Thorn was now determined to find out who he truly was. Commander Thorn's first move was to check the records. In his office, he accessed the Navy's personnel database and typed in the name from the janitorial roster. Silas Vance. The file was insultingly sparse. It listed Silas as a veteran, honorably discharged, with a few mundane postings from decades ago, none connected to special warfare. It was a digital ghost. Thorn used his command-level clearance to dig deeper and was met with a digital wall. Every query returned the same message: record classified. While service records themselves aren't typically secret, operational details can be buried under layers of classification. This level of restriction was telling. Silas Vance wasn't just a former SEAL. He was a ghost whose history had been deliberately and expertly buried. The mystery deepened, and so did Thorn's resolve. A few days later, a minor crisis unfolded at the Aquatic Training Center. During a drown-proofing exercise, a valve controlling the pool's underwater currents malfunctioned, creating a dangerous whirlpool. The instructors ordered the trainees out as panic set in. Silas was in the pump room, supposedly cleaning filters. Thorn had followed him there on a hunch. He watched as Silas, after one glance at the churning water, moved to the tangle of pipes. He didn't consult a manual. He just placed his hand on a main conduit, his eyes closed for a second, as if feeling the vibration. Then, with calm certainty, he ignored the main shutoff and used a wrench to give a small, unlabeled pipe. A precise quarter turn. The whirlpool vanished. When the lead instructor rushed in, he found Silas quietly sweeping. "Did you fix it?" he asked, bewildered. Silas shrugged, not looking up. "Pressure got a little high. Just needed a bypass bleed." He said it like he was discussing the weather. But Thorn knew better. That wasn't a janitor's fix. It was the work of an expert in underwater systems, a man with high-stakes, practical experience. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place thanks to the very arrogance the SEAL program was designed to temper. A new trainee, Braden, was strong, fast, and intelligent, but also cocky. One afternoon, Braden's group was struggling to tie a triple figure-8 bend. Frustrated, Braden threw his rope down. "This is impossible. Why do we even need this old school junk? He noticed Silas watching. What are you looking at, old man? Braden sneered. Bet you can barely tie your own shoes. Silas said nothing. He simply reached into a trash can, pulled out 2 different lengths of discarded rope, and his fingers moved in a blur of twists and loops too fast to follow. In less than 3 seconds, he had tied a perfect triple figure-8 bend. He then tied a double fisherman's bend and an alpine butterfly loop, each executed with flawless muscle memory. He held them up for a moment, then dropped them back into the trash and resumed his work. The trainees were speechless. Braden's face flushed with shame. But Commander Thorne, who had witnessed the exchange, just smiled to himself. The test was complete. He had his answer. The stage was set a week later, during Operation Red Trident, a full-scale hostage rescue simulation in the kill house. The mission was to infiltrate, neutralize seasoned SEAL instructors acting as terrorists, and extract a hostage. Commander Thorne watched from the observation gantry as Braden's team went first. They started with textbook precision. Then it all fell apart. They missed a pressure plate, triggering an alarm. They failed to clear a corner and lost their point man to a paintball marker. They bunched up in a hallway and lost 2 more. Finally, Braden breached the last door with a charge that was too powerful, wounding the hostage. Mission failed. You're all dead. Get out, Thorne's cold voice announced over the intercom. He watched them file out, their arrogance replaced by humility. His eyes landed on Silas, who was leaning on a broom against the far wall. He hadn't been watching the monitors. He'd been watching the trainees. An idea, bold and unorthodox, took root. It was time to act. He keyed the intercom again. All right, reset the scenario. Instructors, back to your positions. He paused. Vance? A hush fell over the facility. Every trainee, including a crestfallen Braden, turned to the janitor. Vance, Thorne repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Get down here. Silas slowly looked up at Thorne. A long, unblinking stare passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of a secret about to be revealed. Braden stepped forward. Commander, with all due respect, he's the janitor. Thorne's reply was ice. That man has forgotten more about this job than you will ever know. Stand back and watch a master at his craft. Slowly, Silas leaned his broom against the wall and descended the stairs. He walked past the bewildered trainees and shrugged off his gray janitor's shirt. The faded trident tattoo on his neck was now fully visible. He took the training rifle offered to him, his hands moving with an ingrained familiarity. The stooped janitor was gone. In his place stood someone else entirely. He gave a sharp nod toward the observation booth. Thorne nodded back. The clock started. What happened next became a base legend. Silas didn't enter the kill house. He dissolved into it. He moved in terrifying silence. He used a sliver of darkness along the doorframe to peer inside, his profile minimal. The first instructor was neutralized by a tap on the shoulder and the cold muzzle of a rifle before he could even raise his weapon. Silas stepped over the pressure plate with the grace of a man sidestepping a puddle. He reached the next hallway. Instead of entering, he paused, listening. Then, he used his rifle to knock a fire extinguisher off its mount. As the instructor swiveled toward the clatter, Silas was already through the hall and past him, a ghost who was never there. He reached the final door. No explosive. He found a small ventilation grate, jimmied the lock with a tool from his janitorial kit, and slid through. The final instructor, focused on the door, was an easy target. Silas disarmed the hostage alarm, slung the dummy over his shoulder, and walked out. The entire run took 94 seconds. Absolute, stunned silence. The instructors emerged, shaking their heads in disbelief. The trainees stared, mouths agape. They had just watched a ghost, a legend brought to life, and the brutal efficiency of his performance was more humbling than any lecture. In the deafening silence, Commander Thorne walked to where Silas stood. He stopped in front of him, a look of profound respect on his face. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Good to see you haven't lost a step," Thorne said quietly, then added a single word that hit like a thunderclap. "Spectre." Silas adjusted the dummy on his shoulder, his expression unchanged. "Floors needed cleaning, Commander," was his only reply. He placed the dummy down and started walking back toward the stairs, as if going to get his broom. Thorne let him go, then turned to the trainees, his eyes burning with intensity. Braden looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Let this be your most important lesson," Thorne began, his voice low and dangerous. "That man is Silas Vance. To you, he was the janitor. You saw his uniform, you saw his age, and you dismissed him. What you failed to see was the hero." He let the words sink in. "That tattoo means he is a brother. That performance is why this story, or ones very much like it, have become legends. His real name, his team, the operations he ran, you will never know them. They are buried under so many layers of classification they might as well have never happened. He and the men he served with were ghosts, tasked with the impossible, and their reward was to be forgotten. That is the nature of the job." Thorne's gaze fell on Braden. He chose this life. He walked away from the shadows and chose quiet service. He doesn't need your respect. You need to learn what it means. The SEAL ethos is about being a quiet professional. It is not about boasting or arrogance. It is about silent, relentless, absolute competence. That man you ignored, he is the embodiment of that ethos. A living monument to the values every one of you hopes to possess. He stared at them. He is the standard. Now you know. Don't ever forget it. Silas Vance went back to his duties, but everything had changed. He was no longer invisible. As the trainees filed out, each one met his gaze and nodded, a new, profound respect. Later, Braden found Silas by the locker rooms. "I'm sorry," he said, "and thank you." Silas just nodded and continued his work. On the surface, his life didn't change. He still mopped the floors and emptied the trash. But he was no longer just a janitor. He was a presence. He was a quiet, constant reminder of the legacy they were all striving to uphold. A silent guardian whose greatest lessons were taught with a lifetime of unassuming excellence. The legend of the ghost janitor spread through the base. A story of a hero who didn't need a medal, only a quiet corner of the world to call his own. Stories like this, whether they are documented fact or powerful fiction, remind us that true legends often walk among us in silence. They are a testament to the idea that greatness isn't about recognition, but about quiet, unwavering service.